Hello, and thank you for watching today. In this video today, we're going to discuss HPE Aruba's data center networking portfolio. My name is Brandon Atchley, and I'm a technical enablement engineer here at Ingram Micro, focused on all things HPE Aruba. And before we dive into the data center portfolio, we're going to talk first about HPE Aruba's CX portfolio, which is critical to understand the data center portfolio. All right, let's talk about the CX portfolio. Now, the CX portfolio released roughly 8 years ago in 2017 and is the accumulation of 30 plus years of network know-how, being the successor to HPE's ProCurve operating system. It's built on top of HPE's 7th generation ASIC, which all of this has allowed us to become number 2 in market share with over 1 billion ports shipped. And it also allows us to be Gartner Magic Quadrant leader for 18 years running. Now, the true success for the CX portfolio is that it's an end-to-end portfolio, going all the way from access, aggregation, and core campus switches up to the data center, which we're here to talk about today, doing things like spine, leaf, and top of rack, with specialty switches and things like ruggedized or distributed services switches. Now, being a part of HPE gives us the ability to have global coverage with our services and support, allows us to leverage things like HPE Financial Services or purchase it through things like networking as a service. Now, if you take a look at the logos at the bottom here, these are some well-known organizations that trust in the CX platform to run their business. Now, let's take a look at the models within the CX portfolio. Now, I do apologize. This is quite an eye chart with a lot of different models on here, but this just shows you how we mean end-to-end portfolio. This ranges all the way from our Axis campus switches all the way up to our top of rack data center grade switches. And the key takeaway with this is that this is a common operating system from end to end, so your engineers do not have to worry about learning two different operating systems when going from the campus to the data center grade switches. Now, to break down the naming conventions of this, the campus switches are things like the CX 4000, 5000, and 6000 series switches, whereas the data center grade switches are CX 8000, 9000, and 10,000, which is what we're focusing on today. Now let's take a closer look at the switches that we consider when we're talking about data center environments. Now this actually starts off with the 6300M because this is an excellent switch choice when dealing with an out-of-band management switch, or we simply have 1 gig requirements and we don't want to chew up higher cost ports like 10 gig or 25. Now looking at the CX64 and the 8400, these are both chassis series switches, which gives us a higher density of ports of like 10, 25, 40, or 100 gig in a single chassis unit. The most common switches, however, are the 8100, 8360, and 8325. These make up the bulk of our data center conversations, being very robust with a lot of different models and flexibility use cases. We also have the 9300, which goes up to 400 gig ports and has a use case in AI environments. And then we have a special use case for the CX10K, which is the first of its kind distributed services switch, which we will talk more in a later slide. And then to manage this whole portfolio, we have the Aruba Fabric Composer, which helps make data center environments easy, making complex layer 3 a breeze with some of the wizards they have in there and integrations into things like virtualization, so we have a better picture of how the entire data center is operating. Now, there is a brand new model that just released at the beginning of 2025 that I wanted to discuss, and that is the 8325H. There's actually two models that were released, the 18 port 10/25 and the 16 port 100 gig. The cool thing about these switches is they're half width, so you can actually fit two of them in one rack unit. Space saver for racks, allowing you for HA configurations. These switches have low latency and lossless, great for storage networks. They're designed to be lower on power consumption and less heat, so it reduces your OpEx cost. These are going to be a really, really big popular switch for storage type environments. Now here's an eye chart of all the switches I just covered for the data center portfolio. If you need to take a second, pause the screen to take a glance over this, but it has a lot of great information. speeds, form factor, where we're deploying these, and some of the special features that these specific models have. Now let's talk about high availability for our data center grade switches. We utilize a technology called VSX, which is similar to stacking, except it's HA for data center. We keep the database and we keep the config files in sync. However, we allow everything else to remain independent. This way, the switches are handling their own sets of traffic, but if there is any type of failure, we can easily migrate that traffic over without any type of loss or drop within the data center environment. Or this allows us to also give us a live upgrade capability. So if we need to upgrade the firmware on these switches, the switches will actually load balance the traffic off while it performs an upgrade, moves the traffic back on, allows the secondary switch to perform its upgrade without any type of downtime within your environment, giving you that 24/7 performance. Now, earlier I promised I'd come back to the CX10K, which is really a unique switch within Aruba's data center portfolio. We call this switch the Distributed Services Switch, and it's really the first of its kind. We developed it in conjunction with AMD Pensando, and we layer additional services on top of our data center switch infrastructure, giving it things like firewall, telemetry, encryption, living right on top of this switching platform. This switch comprises of two DSM modules that support 400 gigs of traffic to run those additional services and link up to a Trident 3 ASIC to give us that high throughput and high performance capabilities. Now, to really talk about why this switch is critical and what was needed about it, this is how we look at third generation data centers, right? These additional services, as I mentioned, typically lived in a specific rack, and when we needed to leverage these services, we typically had to add additional congestion to the network to access them. So if we wanted to layer security within our data center, that was another component we had to send traffic to and from, as this chart shows, right? If we needed to send certain data from rack A, went up to our leaf switch to the spine over to rack E to access those security services, back and forth, adding a lot more congestion onto the network, giving us a higher volume of east to west traffic. With the distributed services switch, the CX10K, those services are now living on top of rack within those specific areas. So when we need to leverage security services or telemetry data, our workloads actually do not have to leave the rack. It goes up to that leaf switch living on top of rack, handles the services, and goes right back down into the workload, reducing the amount of congestion that's accessing the spine or other parts of your network, which gives you a overall lower total cost of ownership, because now we don't have to build in those heavier firewalls or those additional appliances to handle things like load balancing capabilities or telemetry. Now, I mentioned in that overview slide of the data center switches about the Aruba Fabric Composer, and what the Fabric Composer is a management platform. However, it gives us a lot of control and visibility. We can integrate into systems like vSphere. We can integrate with things like NSX. This is how we're integrating in Pensando. So we can get a look at how the virtual infrastructure is laid out. So for spinning up more virtual workloads, our network is always staying kind of aware of how the virtual infrastructure is changing to make any necessarily changes on the network to handle those additional maybe VLANs or routes that need to be provisioned. By tying into that hypervisor or that management platform, we can also link it to our security services to make sure that we're segmenting the network and making sure that everything is staying secured and have full visibility, so that way everything's also performing seamlessly. And with that, that is our data center networking portfolio. Yet again, my name is Brandon Atchley. I'm the technical enablement engineer at Ingram Micro. If there is any questions, please reach out to me. My email address is brandon.atchley@ingrammicro.com, and that will also be a link in the notes of this video. Thank you.